What is happening, everyone? Welcome back. I know it's been a little bit here, and I've been getting a lot of people requesting for me to continue with these. It's just been a really crazy time with everything going on with work, and it's just been one of those moments. But I'm back. We're going to continue on with what we've been doing to kind of review everything. So, a couple updates. This is going to be the last few chapters here, and I'll say these messages for each of the following remaining chapters. But a couple things we're trying to do here with myself and this page, Dr. Jeff Williams, and my Exercise Science Institute. If you all feel obligated and want to help out, I'm trying to develop more content, but I don't have the time and my resources are limited. So if you would, and feel free to donate, we are offering inside of your YouTube channel, there is a super thanks button that you can press on, whether it be in the little sandwich icon or just right below the video. But feel free to donate. It goes a long way. And trying to get new recording equipment, trying to get new equipment so that we can test things out on. So we're always trying to upgrade and make this better. So with that, please feel free to help out. I would love to have more people actively involved in this channel, and it goes a long way. So let's continue on. This is one of those chapters that's near and dear to my heart. It's one of those chapters because I was actively involved in writing this chapter. So again, goes a long way in how I like to look at everything in terms of, you get a very personalized viewpoint of how the writing for this, chapter kind of took place. So let's dive into it. You see your objectives there. This is kind of what, go ahead and read through those. We're going to be kind of diving into, a lot of different terms, a lot of different periodization models and cycles. So just stay focused, be par for the course. It's a little bit longer of a group of chapter PowerPoint slides. So let's just rock and roll with it. All right. So what are we trying to do here? Periodization, using the OPT, the Optimum Performance Training Model. The main focal point of that is that we're looking to program design. And I will tell you from firsthand experience, when I first got into the game and everything, program writing is hard. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not easy. So you always have to be on top of your game. The other thing is that, and my students, that's one of the things that they attested to a lot, especially after the course. So like, this is one of the parts that I struggled with, program design. Everybody thinks that it's just put a bunch of exercise. I don't actually, I shouldn't say that. That's kind of rude. A lot of people just take things and put them down on paper, but there is a rhyme and a reason. I will tell you right now that back in the day when I was a power lifter, before I started kind of mixing around with my training styles, I followed the OPT model. I dictated my strength, my hypertrophy, my not so much muscle endurance, but a lot of that max strength, that plyometric base with the power training, that came from this model. And I would say that as an avid and experienced exerciser, it did function well. And I still to this day kind of follow some of those points of emphasis with some of my friends that I program for now, because I don't always have the most dedicated time to it, but I try my best. So here, program design, like it says, it's vitally important for you to be able to design and implement exercise programs. Well, yeah, that's our goal. Obviously safety is there. Behavioral and psychological wellness is there. Nutrition is there. But if we're talking about exercise, we're talking about program design. Bottom line here, you need to know what your client's goals are. You need to know what their needs are. And then you also need to know what their abilities are. One of the things that I always admired about, and everybody has their own thing about it, but if you look at like the CrossFit model, all right, they have what they call their scaling options. OPT model talks about ability level, and that's where you need to come in, and that's where you need to decide, where is this person on this continuum? Are they a beginner or are they an expert, and where do they fall in between those two styles? All right. When it comes to the program itself, programs are based on your assessments that you do. It's based on the attitudes that are given. Attitude of the person. So what I'm saying with that is what is their mindset? What are they acting like when you give them a new program? What are you acting like? What are they acting like when they get their first program? And from there, you have to adjust. I firsthand personal experience working with some people that for the first time, you just see this look of misery on their face, and you're like, okay, their attitude is very different than someone who's been around for a little while, or someone who's been around that still doesn't like what they're doing because it's like, okay, this is a new challenge, rough, I don't know. So you always have to go by kind of go by feel, and that's by, by attitude. And then obviously your fitness level is there as well. So there are a bunch of questions down there. We talked about a couple of them: needs, goals, abilities. Um, the second one's really important: concerns and contraindications, previous injury, and medical conditions. All of those are involved in that sentence. That goes a long way. That's for safe and injury free training. We got to figure out those things. So that comes part of needs analysis, that comes part of your assessment. What are the results from your assessment? Where are you finding the imbalances to be? That's what training is really about. We're always trying to enhance our imbalances, whether it be musculature, whether it be physical ability, whether it be posture, mobility, whether it be strength, weaknesses. Imbalances incorporate a lot, but when we're talking about muscular imbalance, yeah, we need to make sure we fix those first before they can even think about gaining size, strength, or power. All right. Find out what they like and dislike. Very important. That's going to help create this positive environment, this really nice climate to have your people involved in. From there, you're going to learn, you're going to have to learn this now, and then you're going to use it later. What are your variables? What are your exercise variables? Sets, reps, rest periods, tempos. All right, what are those things that make speed of the lift? All those things are going to come into play when we talk about it more. What's your modality? What are you using? Free weights, bands, machines, plyometric boxes, medicine balls, kettlebell. Where are we going with this? All right. And then the last part of your program design question is how long? How many days of the week? What's your duration? All those things matter because that's going to set you up for, okay, how am I going to split everything up to make sure it fits? Or am I just going to do 3 days of total body? Right? See where the thinking and the rational decisions have to start coming in. So, with that being said, your program design is just a structure of exercises that have an appropriate level of volume and intensity. And if we're talking about anything here, volume and intensity wise, because remember, volume is reps times sets equals volume. Or if you're doing weight volume, reps times sets times the weight you're using, and you add that all together, and that gives you your weight volume. If you're talking about volume and intensity, and I think this might have come up previously, but if not, we're going to talk about it now. When you're using it, which one is more important? That's really the main question you have to ask. Can you keep your volume up and drop your intensity and still get the same stimulus? Can you keep your intensity high and drop the volume and keep the same stimulus? The answer is, interestingly enough, it's not it depends. It actually is the intensity dictates your volume, right? If your intensity stays high, your volume could actually drop down a little bit, meaning like, whether that be frequency of time you're doing it, how many days per week, volume, if you're going down in volume, you can always raise everything up because you have that stamina and that ability level to then be able to function in that manner. So intensity has to be the backbone. So again, if you're trying to go high volume, where's your intensity? It's going to be really hard to keep that intensity at an optimal high level. So you have to drop the intensity down to offset the volume increase. So you're always ebbing and flowing here. But remember, your program design is a roadmap. It is a way to outline what needs to be done. Bottom line. And you can see here, with, this, they talk about the iceberg effect. If you look at the top, right, we know that we want to, if we're working with athletes, then we're talking about athletic performance increases. We're talking about strength and hypertrophy. This is kind of what I was talking about before. Power, speed, agility, quickness, those more non-health related, more skill related fitness techniques. And then your endurance. All those things are what make a change in your performance. But what are the things that we have to look at? If we start getting below surface, if you decrease your, as it says here, there's a decrease in functional movement. Well, yeah, if you have a decrease in functional movement, that means that, proper movement is now gone, stability is not there, mobility is not there, flexibility is not there. technique is just basically gone, right? So although we want our functional movement patterns to elevate, but if we see a decrease in them, you end up below water. So we want to have everything above water, but understand that, our main things to understand are we want to have functional movement, right? And if we have functional movement, we will have proper movement itself. We will also have proper stability, and we will also have proper mobility. So the things that you see below the surface are just as important as the things that you see above the surface. And that's really the main thing. So what are your fundamentals here? Well, the bottom line here is that you have two primary objectives that you want to work when you're talking about your, systematic approach to program design. Okay? And what are we trying to get at is that GAS, that general adaptation syndrome, which has come up before, and your principle of specificity. We don't want to overtax the body. So periodization is a way for us to allow for proper rest and recovery. It's a way for us to not go below homeostasis for too long to return to a positive state. All right. Also, principle of specificity. What are we trying to work with? Are we trying to gain strength? Are we trying to increase lower body strength? Are we trying to increase upper body endurance? Are we trying to increase aerobic capacity? All those things matter in how you're going to program everything. But the main thing to understand with the periodization model is that we're trying to produce adaptations and we're trying to prevent injury, if not reduce the risk of it. So what do? Divide your training programs into specific periods or phases. So these terms are very, very important when it comes to what we're trying to talk about. So annual training plan right here, this highlighted version. That's your macro cycle. If you're talking about, and every organization, every textbook will give you whatever, but understand that typically a macro cycle is something that's 6 to 12 weeks. So you're talking about annually to biannually. But if you're taking a test with NASM and you're trying to pass it, understand your annual training plan is your macro cycle. It is the large telling of what you're going to do throughout the year. What is the next cycle down, or the next phase, I should say? I'll use the right terms. Monthly training phase or phases are your mesocycles. Now, again, it's monthly. Typically with mesocycles, they're broken up into 1 to 6 month or 3 to 6 month plans. But, traditionally it's more monthly. And then lastly, you can see here weekly and daily. What we're talking about there are your microcycles. Now, microcycles weekly, days 1 through 7, plug in your rest periods there and fill in the rest. Daily is what you see on a given day. So a microcycle truly is the small nuts and bolts of what makes up a mesocycle, and the mesocycles make up the true overall picture of your macrocycle. So that's objective number 1. Know those terms, obviously, but it's dividing your plan, your training program or your periodization model into phases. And then the other part is training different forms of strength in each phase so that you can, basically control your training volume, and it's also to prevent injury. Those are keys. So training into different periods and different forms of strength. And that's where you're going to adjust and adapt to each cycle. Each macro, meso, and microcycle will have an adaptation there that you're looking to change. And that's where the OPT model comes in. Okay? So this is just an example. Here's how they have it spelled out. This is an annual plan. Here, there's their example of sports conditioning. In this one, you can see here that in January, just say that, obviously there's a lot of dependent factors here. You can see that the season runs April to October. I'm going to guess with that, we're talking probably baseball here. I'm just randomly throwing out a sport because of the months. But understand that baseball doesn't start just in January in terms of play. So there you see, there's your off season, right? Off season is that bottom X. That means that that's going to have a transition phase from being in your, basically your competition. So let's backtrack. Just say this is the, year 2023, and January 23, December 23. Now we're looking at going into the next year, which is this basically today is January 2nd as I'm talking about this, but now we're in 2024. So October 2023 is when the season ends. November, December, and January of 2024, the next year, that is where you start to see your transitions occur. Seasons ended, you're transitioning into something different, meaning now we're working on different styles of training in that time. Then in February and March, you're going to go into a preparation or preseason training for 2 months. And then you're going to go back into your competitive in season. And then with each one of those X's, you're going to break that down even smaller into your mesocycles within the months. And then within the months, you're going to break them down into the dailies and weeklies. So you have a true plan that makes up each one of these phases. So here's your monthly. And now you're starting to see your 1, 2, 3, and 4. What are they doing on those days? If you see where the X's are, they're doing for the first week, they're doing, 2 days of cardio, they're doing 2 days of resistance training, and they're doing 1 day of, SAQ, speed, agility, quickness. All right. And then you can see at the end of the month, they're going to reassess and they break it down. And so they keep it the same pretty much for these 4 weeks. So this is just one way of doing it. Then your weekly, this is your monthly. Here, again, to your weekly. This is what we're doing. Monday, we're doing it. Monday is cardio, and you're going to break it down. Tuesday's resistance training, you're going to break it down into what you're doing. Cardio, break it down. Thursday, resistance, break it down. Speed, agility, quickness, break it down. 2 days off, right? You're working off of a 7-day period. Now, can you change that up? I know certain people that work off of 10-day periods. Well, you just adjust it accordingly. So that means that you would start maybe you start on a Monday and you end up on what? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Wednesday would be day 10. And then on Thursday would be day 1 again. So you can see where it just adjusts according to what you're trying to do. That changes the periodization a lot, but just understand that traditionally it's based off of a 7-day work week. And if you want to consider it that way. So with program design comes a lot of different things. And typically those things are changes in modalities. What are you using for equipment? Changes in your cycling, meaning like, okay, what are you doing within that time frame? And what are your variables going to, basically change as you go through? How that, with that changing of variables, what we talk about is linear periodization. And this is where we are working on gradual increases in intensity while at the simultaneous time of gradually decreasing volume while increasing intensity. That's linear periodization. It's more of a straight line model. There isn't a lot of ebb and flow. It's usually really traditional in terms of how it's used. Now, a lot of people use this model. A lot of success comes off of this model. It's not to say that one is worse than the other. It's just that linear periodization offers people a more succinct, stepwise feature that you can do, right? And if you look into the time framing, look at weeks 1 through 4. If you're going to go just say a 12-week model, you're looking at weeks 1 through 4. It's going to be light to moderate load, so 60 to 70%, they're saying. And then what's going to happen there is you're going to actually have lower as intensity, but you're also going to have elevated volume there. Weeks 5 to 8 is more of what they consider the hypertrophy and strength, more of like that transitional, going from a little bit more growth into the strength. And then there you can see moderate to heavy loads, 70 to 85%. And what you're going to see there is this is more of that, like I said, transitional model where you're going to have a partially elevated, volume level. And then that's going to start going down as you get into weeks 7 and 8, where the volume is going to be lower and the intensity is going to be higher. And that's usually where you start seeing that. If you look right here if you look at my mouse right down here in this little transitional, too much. All right, we don't want to do that. But that's where we're looking at is with that picture, we want to have that there, right? So if we see it, this little transitional period is where we would see that weeks 5 to 8. And then after that, 9, 10, 11, and 12, that's where volume is going to be on the dip end of this blue, and the weight or intensity is going to be on the elevated portion of the orange line. So blue is down, that's your volume. Volume is down. And then also your strength, not your strength, but your load is going to be intensified. Now you're building, and it says 100%. Well, if you're going to reassess, you're going to try to achieve a 100% or higher if the adaptations are there. So that's key to your progression here, is that you always want to look for that way when you're working with linear periodization. But again, it's straight line. You can see it's a very smooth road that you're following on. It's like a freshly paved road versus when you start getting into other aspects like undulating periodization, where you start to change up your schemes, right? And that becomes tricky. So what you have here is nonlinear. Okay, so if we go back, linear, nonlinear is when you start having like bumpy roads that you're talking about. If we look at it from a traditional standpoint, I'll just kind of throw on a little graph here. So if I am going to make a little graph, right, and you saw what the other one did this, right, came up and through. Here we're going to get rid of that. Undulating means that you're going to start in a certain level and pop up, and then maybe after a while you might start coming down a little bit, leveling off. You might come up into a maximum phase and then come back down through, and you can see you're ebbing and flowing versus being, again, more in that linear model that we talked about before. So that is critical to everything that we are talking about here. So undulating is more about coming in and out of it. And if you look, this is just an example of a microcycle, but muscular endurance focused workouts. If you're like, okay, that's more over here, remember, that's more in the early stages of linear. Then Tuesday, maybe you're either doing cardio or you're off. Wednesday is more power focused. Well, if you look at power in terms of that might be more down in this region down here. All right. And then if you go back, hypertrophy focus, you're more in that middle section. So you can see where you're kind of hitting on all cylinders, just at different times throughout that period. That's what makes undulating a little bit different. Has there been some research that's shown that, one is better than the other? Yes. But there isn't a definitive yes when it comes to that. Depending upon what, the research is trying to prove and what people they're using, sample size, that always comes into play. Depending upon what sport or exercise they're trying to do, comes into play. So some benefit from undulating and some benefit from linear. It's not definitively one is better than the other. It's that a lot of times it's what's more beneficial, right? What is it that you're trying to achieve here? And that is where you can start becoming more creative in your approaches. Undulating offers you an ability to be more creative. Linear is very straight and to the point. Okay, very much a difference when it comes to that. But it doesn't, again, mean that one is better than the other. So what are we talking about when we get into, these parts? We start talking about like stability, muscle endurance, hypertrophy strength, maximum strength. We know about those terms, right? We know about this OPT model. We know that it's a stepping stone up and down. And remember, you go up the steps to get to a location, you go down the steps to leave a location. Sometimes you go down halfway and you forget your keys and you got to go back up. It's a metaphor for, you don't always have to be succinctly phase 1 to phase 5, phase 5 to phase 1. You can always create your paths in that region. For example, if you have a person who's reassessed, right, and you reassess them, where does that put them when you reassess them? Does that mean that they have to start right back at phase 1 again? No. We start them where we feel like their assessment takes them. So we always are worrying about which levels we need to be at. Are we in the stabilization phase, which is level 1? Are we in the strength phase, which is level 2, or in the level 3 power phase? The reason why that's important is because 1 and 5 are pretty much set in stone. We know that stabilization endurance is going to be achieved there and power is going to be achieved here. This strength phase is where we can be very differentiated and make our plans really kind of cool. Are we trying to be a little bit more endurance based but still kind of stay strong? Are we trying to enhance muscle growth? And are we trying to just be as strong as possible? And those will make a big difference in what we're trying to achieve. So if you look, I'm not going to go through each of these, but understand that there's your level. Go back to your OPT model. There's your levels on the right. Here's your phases on the left. That's what this is all breaking down for you. Phases, levels on the left, phases in the middle. What are you looking for? So this is a good roadmap for you to follow when it comes to your design. Primary adaptions, mobility and flexibility. That's what we're trying to achieve in stability and endurance training. One of them on top of other things. Strength endurance, core strength, and joint stabilization. That's one of them. Muscular development training. That's, like we talked about, more hypertrophy training. What are you trying to do? Core strength, muscle strength, and hypertrophy. Max strength, core strength, and maximum muscular strength. And then power is more about rate of force production and maximal muscle strength. So you can see there. And then from there, there's your progressions on the right. What are we trying to do? What are you going to do as we progress through this design? And that's critical when it comes to your flow through your design. So when we talk about the OPT template, and you can find this directly on NASM's website. There's an example right here of the template that you can use. After a while, I developed my own, right? I found a way to make it look the way it was more appealing to me, but I still kept all the nuts and bolts of what OPT was all about. I just made it look more, more appealing to my eye, so I could catch what I had to do. Maybe if I was in the middle of my training session and didn't have everything memorized in my brain. So what does that template include? You saw the picture, but it's a warm-up component, an activation component, skill development, resistance training, and then a cool down. Okay? Those are really important to flow. You have to have a warm-up. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter what you're doing. There needs to be a warm-up. How you do that warm-up is up to you. It doesn't mean hop on a treadmill for 5 minutes and that's it. And then I'm done. No, that's not what it is. What it is, it's a way for you to get blood flowing, muscles engaged, and basically priming them to be moving for the way that you want them to. The activation, if we come over here, you can see your activation. You're going to have some core and balance, potentially, as many as are needed to get, again, it's more, I kind of take the activation more as, again, another primer, getting the core musculature not fatigued, but used, not abused, and ready to go. Same with balance. Balance has been shown before training to help muscles work in sync, okay, and work in coordination with each other. So that's critical. Now, skill development, plyometric based or strength, speed, agility, and quickness based, those are important because they, again, are going to prime you for your movement, but again, they should not be taxing. If you're going to do a true skill development day, you probably aren't going to be doing much resistance training afterwards. So you don't want to fry the nervous system and you don't want to fry the muscular system. So you don't want to fry the neuromuscular system completely and take you out of the game so that your resistance training lacks. Okay. Now, I told you all before that this is one of those things where I use this. Yeah. I've done it where I've did abs beforehand. I've done balance training beforehand. And we're not talking like 7, 8 different exercises. We're talking maybe 1 core, 2 core, one balance training. Maybe one day you're only doing core, maybe one day you're only doing balance. And then on the other day you're doing the opposite. Again, creativity is crucial here, but I will say that I did it this way and it did not kill me when it came to my training, my resistance training. Because remember, I was a power lifter at that time. So again, there we're talking max strength, hypertrophy, and power. And it did not make me fatigued halfway through my workout. And that was critical because I was very skeptical about it at first. There's your skill development, like I said, plyometrics, speed, agility, quickness. Your resistance training, what are you going to do during that time? And then at the end, your cool down. What are you doing to cool down? Again, light cardio, 5 to 10 minutes. That's critical. Okay. What is it that we're doing in that regard to cool down the body? Now, that doesn't mean, again, hop on the treadmill for 5 minutes and you're done. No, take the time to foam roll, take the time to static stretch, take the time to go for a 400-meter walk and come back. Whatever it is that you got to do, because that's going to be the critical component to getting your body to start the recovery process, bring the heart rate down, get blood to stop pooling in the areas that it was engulfed in, where there was complete engorgement of blood to that area. So there's your levels. Stabilization. All right. This is that first level, stabilization. And we said there's only one phase in there, and that's the stabilization endurance. What are we looking for? There's your adaptations, development of proper movement patterns, and mobility and stability of your entire kinetic chain, head to toe. Okay? There's what we want to focus on. You guys can read those, pause it, look at those. But if you're taking a test, what are you looking for? Bottom line, know what the focus points are and know what are your main adaptations for each of these levels. Okay? So you want to be able to, read the question. It's going to give you maybe say stabilization training will do this, and you have to make sure you know which one of them is. And you need to be able to decipher between what's a stabilization focus or a stabilization adaptation versus the others. So pause it, note it, whatever you got to do to make sure that it works. Also understand too that, and this isn't, I'm not a really good business person when it comes to this stuff, but if you need these PowerPoints, please reach out to me. There is a nominal fee that comes with it, so feel free to always reach out if you need them. These are created I do create these on my own, so I try to make them look appealing to you all. So again, if you need them, feel free to reach out and we can make it happen. So with your stabilization, how long are you in the phase? 2 to 6 weeks, depending upon you. I mean, some people who are good movers might just need like a little refresher and pop out. Some need to be in there longer. All right. Same thing with stabilization training, what we just talked about. Make sure you know what your movement patterns are. Squatting, hip hinging, pulling, pushing, pressing, and multiplanar, using all 3 planes of motion. Sagittal, frontal, and transverse. Sagittal, front to back, frontal, side to side, transverse, rotational. You need to know those and know that this is what I'm doing inside of these and know what each one of them means. You need to know what each one of those are. If I'm not mistaken, I believe, let's see, let me just make sure here. Nope, I believe a previous chapter had gone over each of these fundamental movement patterns, because I think if not, that's the other chapter that I wrote for. So just understand that this is where you're looking. This is what you're going to take that previous information and put it to here. So here's some examples of, muscle groups. What are we talking about? Understanding those first rounds of a compound movement. Traditionally, we talk about how you should be doing compound movements first before you do any isolated movements. There's some good research on how that works and why that's important, because the isolation will fatigue those muscle groups sooner, which means if you're trying to achieve some pretty high intensity, it might be more challenging. So again, you got to always, you got to know your people. You got to know what your goal is for your training design. I've done it where I've actually done what we call pre-exhaustion training, which means you put all your isolation or more fatiguing groups up first, and then you put your other, more taxing intensity at the end. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to overcome the fatigue and still lift those weights under fatigue. Not for people who are just beginning, but you get the ideas if you're trying to progress. So there's always these abilities where your program design can just become what you want it to be, but it has to be specific to the person and their goals. All right. There's your proper squatting technique over there. That's one of them. Here, so there is your squatting. Oh, I guess we're going to go through it now. I thought it was in chapter 13, but I forgot. Hip hinging. Hip hinging can come from everything. There's your muscle groups down there on the right. What are some of the examples? Deadlifts, back extensions, good morning, kettlebell swings, and any Olympic weightlifting. Folks, I'm just going to say it here. Disclaimer, if you do not understand Olympic weightlifting and how to complete either a simple power clean, a simple power snatch, if you can't do it yourself, and this is no disrespect to anybody, but if you can't do it yourself and you're not doing it with proper form, number one, take the time to go get the training for it. Very critical. You can always find people in your local areas that are USAW trained. Or if you're going to, maybe go on to strength and conditioning, you might want to go that route. But take the time to get coached on it. You should not be coaching movements that you cannot do yourself, or at least show a proper demonstration with unloaded bars or light kettlebells, right? It's same thing with a Turkish getup. If you don't know how to do a Turkish getup, you have to be able to know how to explain it while someone is on the floor doing it. But it's better off that you know how to do it because you can explain it while you're doing it, and it makes everything more streamlined. So that's more of a disclaimer, but please, please, please make sure that you're not coaching Olympic or trying to give people Olympic weightlifting motions if you do not know how to critique them. That's the same thing with good mornings. If you don't know how to do a good morning and it's a very simple movement, learn it yourself and then do it. And no one says you have to put a load on, just do a body weight. There you go. Kettlebell swings. There's nothing worse than watching somebody who does a kettlebell swing and it's all hip hinge. If you notice it says there, and again, I'm not trying to be rude, but if it says hip hinge, what don't you do? You don't squat. Your knees and your hips do not bend simultaneously while you're doing a kettlebell swing. Your hips move back and your hips move forward, and the knees are just a residual movement that come from it. So, critical for that. Make sure you know the hip hinging. If you know how to deadlift, you should know how to be able to kettlebell swing. If you know how to hip hinge, you should know how to be able to take a hip hinge, use it with a hip back, hip forward to even do a box jump, right? A lot of these movements have carryover to other things. So hip hinging and squatting are two of the most important ones that anybody needs to be proficient at, if not an expert at. Pulling motions. Pulling motions are anything that would require, I don't want to say backwards motion, but it's more things that come toward you versus away from you. There's your musculature over on the right. What are some daily tasks that you see, like opening a door? That's a pull. Not pushing a door open. Raking leaves, that's a pull. So what are things that you do? Pull-ups, chin-ups, lat pull-downs, rows, cobras. Those are just some examples, right? That's what we're looking to do. Pulling. Pushing, opposite. Opposite musculature, opposite concentric action, opposite examples of daily tasks or ADLs, and then basically opposite workouts or exercises. Push-ups, bench press, deadlift, dumbbell chest press, close grip bench press, close grip push-ups. All those are pushing. That's away from the body. All right? Those are very, very important for opposing actions. Push and pull. That's why people do push and pull on the same day. They do push and pull on opposite days. That's part of your program design. Pressing, right? Another one we have to talk about. Pressing is going to be more delts, traps, triceps, and your rotator cuffs. All right? Different concentric joint actions, different musculature. Mostly more pressing overhead. All right, but there, we also have bench pressing too. But traditionally, when we talk about pressing, it's moving things vertically. Where if you think about it, bench pressing, if you look, is horizontal. If you were to stand that person up, they're pushing forward versus up. So make sure you understand that bench pressing, although it says press, is a pushing model. Pressing, although it's a pushing model, is more vertical and more overhead. So that's why like a kettlebell swing in some ways is a hip hinge mixed with a pushing motion mixed with a pressing motion. So there's a lot that goes into it. So again, where is the predominance? Force action is what we talk about. Okay. So with pressing, it's more overhead. With these movement patterns, obviously we can adjust accordingly. All right. Traditionally, one of the problems that we run into, if you look here, this first one is really important, right? We talk about how things are more in the sagittal plane, okay? Meaning they're more front to back. Well, if that's the case, what we want to make sure in this cycle or this phase is that we don't just go straight, sagittal plane. We got to be multi-planar. We have to be able to use rotation. We have to be able to use side to side. All right, because we need to be able to, like it says on the bottom there, we need to be able to provide more of a proprioceptive demand, and we have to make sure we have postural control, but we can't do that if we're working just solely in one plane. It makes our bodies kind of misaligned in a way where we can't handle the rotation because our balance is off. We can't handle the side to side because those musculatures have not muscles have not been moved in that manner enough that they're controlling the weight like they're supposed to. So it's very, very important that we do that. All right, very critical. So, now we're getting into the training design. Here's an example. I'm just going to kind of stop for a second, and then you can look at how these things are done. Warm-ups, you always want to follow a warm-up technique that is done and explained in previous chapters when we talk about proper warm-ups. Activation, when we talk about core and balance, we want to go back to those phases that are those chapters that we talked about regarding how to program for core and balance. Skill development and SAQs, same thing. We want to be able to take and use those variables that we've learned previously to put them into place here. Resistance training, same thing. What phase are we working in? Well, the main thing to understand here is sets are 1 to 3, reps are 12 to 20, tempo is slow, rest is moderate to none, and then progress as needed. Okay. And then your cool down, follow your cool down model. If again, you can pause here. This is a true example, and if you have the book, go into your table 21.9, and this is a little bit clearer for you. But you can see here you're following all program variables, and you're following all the aspects that need to be followed when it comes to what you're trying to achieve in that regard. Okay. Strength. So we move from the stabilization model to now strength. Now remember, there's 3 different levels here: level 2, level 3, and level 4. Level 2 is more about strength endurance, or phase 2 is more about strength endurance. Phase 3 of the OPT is muscular development. We said that's more hypertrophy, more muscle growth. And then phase 4 is that maximal strength training, which is vastly different than the rest. So, but level 2 is complete strength, which is phases 2 to 4, and then your phases are those that we just talked about. All right. Phase 2, what are we focusing on? Again, I said this before with the first phase and the first level is that you need to know what the focuses are and what the adaptations are, and each one of these is shown here. Phase 2, it's on a hybrid, trying to increase your stabilization and endurance, get some hypertrophy, and gain some strength, especially for new people. All right. And then progress from increasing your proprioceptive demands, your volume and intensity, and then you're going to decrease your resting periods. That's going to be critical. Phase 3, again, muscle growth, muscle hypertrophy, increase your volume and intensity. This is where you have that transition period. Remember, I said you're trying to, your volume stays up and your intensity is going to increase, and they're going to kind of match each other. So it's almost like moderate versus max. Okay. Weight loss, cardiorespiratory training, that should be involved here because, again, you're trying to lean out. Do not go with the old adage, and you're going to see people continue to say this, that if you do cardio, it's going to, in quotations, eat your muscle. Number 1, please stop saying that because that's not true. All right. Number 2, it depends on how much cardio you're doing. Number 3, it depends on what your diet is like. So there's a lot of variables. Don't assume the old adages are still true because they've been disproven. I hate to say it, but you look at these people that are in like Functional fitness, right? They're able to run 3 miles, 4 or 5 miles, and still be able to deadlift over 500 pounds. And they got a large amount of muscle mass. Volume is key, right? That's key to everything. And cardio resistant or cardio respiratory training is higher volume, but mixed in accordingly with your resistance training, and you're good. Okay. So that's where it becomes a little bit, of that, like, not so scary to do cardio anymore, because if anything, it's going to help you with your heart health in general. And then phase 4, this is again, inside of this level of strength, that's the one that's going to provide you the maximum strength. What are you focusing on? Load, increasing your load to a maximal or to near maximal percent, and then increasing the demands on the tissue strength of your body. So not only muscle, but you're talking about trying to increase the strength of your tendons and your ligaments and your other soft tissues to make them more resilient for the heavier loads. Okay? Same thing, warm up, activation, follow your procedures that you've learned before. Skill development, plyometrics, SAQ, follow what you got. Now, one thing that I see here, can use alternative exercises such as Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, and martial arts drills. I agree, but again, make sure you are comfortable with coaching them to your people to then go from there. Okay? Olympic weightlifting is compound, powerlifting movements are compound, but they're drills, and their martial arts drills are meant to be first because they're more compound in nature. So you're going to use more body parts. So try not to isolate first in that regard. With that phase 2, right, there is what we're doing here. It's a hybrid base because it's stability mixed with strength. And really what we talk about in this phase 2, I think sometimes gets lost in your readings, is that it's a superset orientation. What you do is a strength focus followed by a stability focus. It's, back to back. So when you write these programs out, what I used to do, I'm just trying to see if they do it. Nope, they don't have a show of that. Let's see. No, not so much. What I'll just kind of give you what I used to do is if I was like writing everything, and you can see my mouse over here. If I was writing it out, I would write 1A, 1B. And then I would put that in my template. I would put 2A, 2B, so that you can see kind of what that superset entails, because that's going to be the important part, is making sure your matches are shown. You don't want somebody to go, oh, we're going to go bench press, chest press, lat pull down, cable row, shoulder press, down the row, and then be like, okay, and then just go right into push-ups, cable press, No, you're not going to do that, because you want to go left, right, when you're doing them together. So it is a superset of each. Okay? That's a lot of change versus what you would traditionally do. And when we say like vertical versus horizontal loading, vertical meaning straight down the line, horizontal meaning across. We want to go more left to right in this regard. So if you're writing this out, it would be, 1A bench press, and right below it 1B push up. And then in the next row, you're A, B, A, B. Or, if you're doing ABC, which is kind of crazy for doing trisets, but you never know what people are into these days. With phases 3 and 4, all right, phase 3 we said is more of that traditional hypertrophy, more growth. And you can see there reps are a little bit different, 6 to 12, lower rest period. All right. Intensity, that's going to be, when you're looking at it, it's to be determined. Well, yeah, the reason why it's to be determined is because it's a hard play. But remember, if you look back at your information, it was 70 to 85% of your max. It's to be determined because you have to determine all these other variables before you plug in your intensity. You can't do 85% for 12 reps. Like, that's going to be way too demanding on the body, and it's probably going to be way too much for the body, and you won't be able to hit that rep number. So that's critical for that. Okay. Phase 4, we said, is max strength, reps 1 to 5. Well, if you're doing 1 rep, you're probably not going to, if you're doing 1 rep of a high intensity, it's not going to be 1 rep of a 5 rep max because it's going to be 5 reps. See where we're going with that. If you're doing 100%, that means that's your 1 rep max. You shouldn't be doing that 5 times. Well, unless you don't know what your 1 rep max is, and when you go to reassess, you do it 5 times. That just shows you that your 1 rep max went through the roof. Okay? So just be aware of those situations. As far as the cooldowns go, if that's going to be the same thing as it's been before. It's just that there's a slight tweak. Although, like we were showing you here, your warm-up, activation, plyos, SAQs are all the same. Phase 2, Phase 3, and Phase 4 would be inserted as they would, and then a cool down would be the same for all 3 of those phases. That's why it was written the way it was. So 2, 3, and 4 have the same setup. It's just that their resistance training model is the only difference. Everything else should be similar. Again, table 21.11 or 11, that's going to be your example for strength endurance. 21.12 is your muscular development. And then 21.13 is your max strength. Lastly, level 3, power, phase 5, power. Level 3, power, phase 5 of the OPT model is power. Now, power is force times velocity, all right? That's critical when you're talking about moving things as fast as possible, okay? And we need to be aware that you have to have proper levels of stability and proper levels of strength before you really should be diving into this power-based training. A new person can do some power-based training, but they're not going to do the things, exercises, and traditional level 3 power components that would be done in that stabilization or level 1 or phase 1, because the body just can't handle that, and you're setting people up for, to get hurt. But can you put a box, this is where it gets tricky, is like power, like box jumps are power. They're not plyometric, but they're power. And that's always a fight too, is, an argument that's always withstanding. But you can do a box jump. It's just you're not going to have them do it at an optimal level. They're going to do it to be able to get their bodies moving off the floor. Some people might just be doing hops, so that's still power-based. It's just not the same premise as what we were talking about here in level 3/phase 5. So warm-up, very similar. Only difference here is that now when we get to the activation, we're talking about explosive movements. And we're talking about dynamic to controlled positioning of your balance. So a little bit different. Skill development is going to be a little bit different because things are, as you can see here, going to be more explosive in their movements. Tempos are going to be explosive. Resistance training, 3 to 5 reps, 3 to 5 sets, 1 to 5 strength-based, 8 to 10 power-based movements. So again, on the bookends of everything is our supersets. So the same thing's going to apply here. Supersets, you're going to do a strength motion followed by a power motion. So maybe you're going to do like 3 reps of a deadlift, and then you're going to do maybe 8 reps of a box jump. Okay? Or you're going to do 3 reps of a deadlift, and then you're going to do 8 of a trap bar, 30 to 45% trap bar squat jump with the trap bar in your hand. Now, 30 to 45% is probably pretty low for you, but the whole advent of it is to move that with good technique, going through full range of motion, all the way up, all the way down, and then explode all the way up so that you can then power yourself off the floor with maximum velocity so that you can achieve a high jump with the trap bar and the weights on it in hand. And then your cool down would be the same thing. Okay? There's your examples there. 21.14 in your book, that's the table example. It's a little bit clearer of a view, but gives you all the way that your template can be set up. So these last few that we're going to refer to are more of traditional models. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of flip and hold on for a second, flip and hold on for a second. But I'll talk briefly about each one. If you look here, like body fat reduction, they're saying, you're spending 4 weeks in each phase. So you're really doing a true monthly model. You're doing phases 1 to 3 all the way up to hypertrophy. Notice that you're not going through strength and power. Maybe a person doesn't need to. They just want to do weight management. So they don't need to go up that high. But if you notice, as they progress, they start all 3 phases after July. So you're talking about 6 months of true work. And then they're getting into all 4 sections, 3 phases 1, 2, and 3, and then cardio for the 4th. So a little bit different than if you go down to, body fat reduction. Here, this is a mesocycle of how that works, and it's broken down. Well, this looks like it's like the first week in January. So if you go back here, see in January, it's stabilization and cardio. It shows it right here, stabilization and cardio. And they're doing 3 days a week, which is optimal. That's still good. You just don't want to over abuse their bodies, right? Increasing lean body mass. Now we're talking about hypertrophy. We're talking about phase 4. All right. So it tells you what you're looking at here. And if you look, January is kind of an intro. And this is kind of more of like that linear periodization in a certain extent. But if you're trying to increase lean mass, you're gonna linear. And then when you get into May, we start that little bit of a bump in terms of that is truly an undulating style right there. Month to month, you're changing. So a little bit different than what we saw in the more linear approach right here. That's more linear. This is more undulating. But you're trying to, now it's a different stimulus, so you're going to be doing a different packaging. And here's here's what we're talking about. Here's what the plan looks like in terms of a month. So it looks to me like they're going to go 4 days a week, but I guarantee you any money, it's going to be Monday and Tuesday, upper, lower, or lower, upper with cardio, and then vice versa. So it might, if this were me and I'm looking at this, I would probably go upper, lower, lower, upper, just because I'd like to keep it. And then the next week I would go upper, lower, and I would just keep it changing so that people don't get into that flow. By having this day off in between, if I went lower, day off, lower, it should be enough for them. But again, if it's maybe this is their first month ever, maybe I'm going to go upper, lower, just because so it depends on the person. And that's really what it comes down to. But again, this is January, so if it's a first-time person or they're getting reintroduced, if they're an experienced person, I might go upper, lower, upper. So it just depends. Like I said, very variable. And that's why we assess, and that's why we are always looking at fitness level and how experienced they are. Now you can see here, this is February, changes up a little bit. Now we're getting into more of that phase 2, more of that strength endurance. So it changes it. And that, remember, this is more superset based. There's your March, which is now going into that phase 3, which is more of that hypertrophy or muscular adaptation phase. And then there's April, which now we're down into phase 4. We're now down into the max strength, which we know can increase muscle as well as increase strength. So just because you're not working solely in that hypertrophy phase does not mean that, you're not going to, with max strength, you can still gain muscle. It's just a different way of versus this one here previously with phase 3. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, phases 1 through 4, this here, I think earlier I said that it was all the way up to or was that previous? Nope, I was wrong. So yeah, so here you're going to work up into the max strength category, which is a little bit different than if you were in the previous one, which was body fat reduction. So I didn't want to confuse myself and think I was talking about the wrong thing. And then there's your phase 3, there's your phase 4. General sports performance, we're going to be using phases 1, 2, and 5. So, interestingly, I'm I'm under the impression that this is general sports performance. This is the choice they make. Everybody has a different choice, but here, for this sake, for talking purposes, they start off in that phase 1, they get into phase 2, and then they go phases 1 through 5. So they're going to go through all 3 phases from March all the way to December. So they're going to basically like a transition phase, a reintroduction, and then they're going to get into some more explosive training as they get into March and beyond. So a little bit different, but does that mean that you can't throw in a strength 3 and 4 in here every once in a while? Not necessarily, but it just depends on, again, I can't sit here and say I know exactly what they're trying to achieve here, because we don't know if it's general sports performance. What's the athlete's goal? What sport do they play? A lot of variables come into it where we could potentially add in a 3 and 4. But for the sake of conversation, understand that after March, we're rolling through phases 1, 2, and 5 constantly. Here's their meso for January. So again, with that phase 1, there's phase 2 for February, and then there's your adjustment period into phases 1, 2. So if phases 1, 2, and 3, a little bit different. But again, this is more undulating, where you're incorporating more aspects into it versus being more linear in approach. So this is our chapter. This is our life. This is our optimum performance training model, chapter 21. It goes off of the OPT model, very clear, very succinct, but it needs to be followed, and you have to understand the makeup of each phase and each level, and you got to know what the stimulus is, or the objectives, or the adaptations you're trying to achieve are for each section. Also, know your motions. Make sure you know your squatting, your hip hinging, whatever it is that you need to do. All right. I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to this one. I know a lot of you have been asking about this one, so I wanted to get this out there while I was on vacation and had some time. So, again, if you like this, stuff that we're putting out, leave a comment. Feel free. I'd love to hear some feedback, what you guys want to see more of. I'm not opposed to working with other organizations. I have a lot of materials because I do instruct a lot of stuff within my university. So there are materials I can talk about. I can even go into more specific things. Like if I just let me just pull up one slide here. If you wanted to know, I can dive into linear periodization deeper if I needed to for you. So that makes a critical, makes it more critical for you. So that feedback is important. And then, like I said, if I said it earlier, but if you want to, feel free to leave a super thanks. Like I said, that money goes a long way into trying to develop new materials, new criteria, and then possibly new equipment that can help with me more visual. So again, thank you all for your time. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope you get a lot out of what my page and my organization, Exercise Science Institute, have to offer. So thank you and have a great day.